time for another CarsGuide Ute comparison test, and in this one we've got three vehicles. Well, if they had a Facebook status, it would be, it's complicated, but they're all very competitive in the 4x4 dual cab part of the market.
That's right, mate. What we have here is the new Mazda BT-50, and it's based on the new generation Isuzu D-Max, whereas in the past, it was pretty much a Ford Ranger in disguise. This matchup is going to be a beauty.
It's going to be awesome, and in this test I'll be taking care of the on-road part of the video, while Crafty will be doing the off-road part.
I will give it a nudge. These three dual cab diesel four-wheel drive utes with automatic transmissions are towards the top of their respective model lines, and all of them have a point to prove in this test. The Mazda BT-50 model we've got here is the range-topping GT variant. Does it look enough like a range topper? In this company it's a bit understated, but it is a bit more affordable, on list pricing anyway. The Isuzu D-Max in this test is the X-Terrain, the show pony flagship model in the new generation D-Max lineup. The price you see here is a list price, but the brand is doing drive-away deals already. Check out Auto Trader to find a bargain. Then there's the established legend of this segment, the Ford Ranger Wildtrak. We've got the 2-litre bi-turbo version, which waves the most expensive flag in this comparison test.
You can find out what your money will get you in each of these utes by reading the full detailed comparison test, and you'll find the link to that story in the description below.
If you want to watch Matt detail the on-road driving experience, then stay tuned. But if you're a little bit impatient and you want to see how these three utes go off-road, then feel free to scrub ahead. The time codes are on screen now.
And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll find the chapter markers in the timeline. And if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, share this video with your friends, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all of our latest videos, because there's plenty more on the channel. Now, should we go for a drive? The first thing you notice as soon as you slide into the driver's seat of the BT-50 is just how upmarket feeling the interior is. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that you get brown leather, which is lovely. I actually really like brown leather. I think it's quite nice. It sets it apart in this segment, and Mazda's all about that. In a bunch of the different segments in which they play, they do different trim finishes to make their cars feel, well, just a bit special. Also making the BT-50 feel special is heated seats. Well, actually, you get them in the Ranger as well. And also an auto-dimming rear view mirror, which you also get in the Ranger, but you don't get those in the D-Max. Anyway, what I'm saying is the BT-50 feels nice inside, and it's got a redesigned dashboard compared to the D-Max, which makes it just a little bit more upmarket. There's a bit more of the soft material stuff that you might want if you're buying a premium ute, and it's, yeah, pretty impressive. There are some elements which obviously are carried over from the D-Max, including the screen layout, the steering wheel, the instrument cluster, all of that, but it just looks different, which is what a lot of people will want. It doesn't drive differently though. It's in fact identical to the D-Max to drive, because Isuzu didn't really let Mazda do anything to the steering, the suspension, the engine, the transmission. It's basically a cut and paste job, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's talk about the engine first. It is an Isuzu engine, a 3-litre turbo diesel 4-cylinder. It's got less power and torque than a lot of its rivals for such a big engine capacity, but it's a pretty honest thing. And it's got a 6-speed automatic transmission, which does a fairly good job in most situations. You will notice that it can jump around a little bit at higher speeds because it's trying to keep you in its torque band, which is actually quite a broad torque band, but you might notice that transmission being a little bit busy, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. You get used to it. The engine can be a little bit noisy though, and that's something you'll have to just live with, and that's the same in the D-Max, to be honest. Just like the D-Max and the Ranger in this test, the BT-50 has 3.5 ton maximum brake towing capacity, 750 kilos for an unbraked trailer, and that means that it's at the benchmark level for dual cab utes in this segment. Now, this particular BT-50 doesn't have a tow bar, so we can't do a towing comparison this time around, but stay tuned, we'll get to it. I've really come to appreciate just how nice the steering is because I've driven an existing BT-50 and the steering in it was very heavy, but this is very accurate and very usable. And sure, it's still got a big turning circle, 12.5 meters, but it's a ute, so you've got to expect that. And it just means that when you are doing a U-turn, a 3 or 5 point turn, then it's going to be a little bit easier to maneuver. The ride comfort it's okay for a ute. It's not exceptional. It's not as comfy as, well, one of its other competitors in this test, which you'll find out about soon. But it is okay. The balance between comfort and control is okay, but I wouldn't say that it's cushy or relaxed. Just, you notice a bit of the surface underneath the tyres, maybe more than you might expect that you would in a brand new generation ute, especially one that's sort of aimed at luxury ute buyers. One of the big ticks for the new platform that underpins this D-Max and BT-50 is the fact that it gets so much safety technology as standard. We love that. Honestly, it's such a big step forward for the dual cab ute segment, and if you're a dual purpose buyer, the sort of person who wants to use their ute for work during the week and take the kids down the coast on the weekend, then you're going to love that it's got so much safety tech. Although some of those safety systems can be a little bit overbearing, especially the steering assist system in both the BT-50 and the D-Max. It can get annoying. Unlike some of the other utes in this segment, it's not as simple to turn off those safety systems if they do get a little bit annoying for you. You have to use the steering wheel controls and it's through the driver information screen. There's no simple button to turn off the steering assist, which could be a little bit frustrating. You can disable all those safety systems when you go off-road though. So this new BT-50 is based on the Isuzu D-Max, and it makes sense that we'll jump into that one next. If you didn't watch the Mazda part of this video just before, this is going to make no sense, but it feels basically the same to drive. The D-Max and the BT-50 are the same underneath, and so there's actually not a whole lot new to talk about when it comes to the drive experience in the D-Max as opposed to the BT-50 because they're identical. But I suppose I should tell you all about the D-Max drive experience anyway, because you're watching this part of the video. So here goes. The steering is light, accurate, and direct, and quite easy to maneuver into parking spots or 3 and 5 point turns, just like the BT-50. The ride is okay, just like the BT-50. It's pretty comfortable for the most part, although without a load in the back, you can feel that it's a little bit jittery, although the D-Max X-Terrain is about 100 kilos heavier than the BT-50 GT. And that means that it does just have a very slight advantage in terms of ride comfort. If you didn't drive them back to back, you probably wouldn't pick up on it, but we've been driving back to back and I've picked up on it. So the ride is pretty good. The suspension copes pretty well with direction changes, and it's also not too sharp over lumps and bumps in the road surface. The steering, as I mentioned, not too bad. The engine, yep, it's good enough. There's a 3-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel, and it's the same engine as in the BT-50. It's got less power and torque than a lot of its competitors, but it's a more relaxed drive experience because, well, it's not too strained, and the 6-speed auto does a pretty good job of keeping it in its sweet spot in the torque band, which means that it can be a little bit busy at higher revs, but you get used to it. And it's not too noisy, although it's not the quietest ute in this test either. So what sets the D-Max apart from the BT-50? Well, it's the interior design and finishes. It's not quite as plush as the BT-50, and that might matter to you. I mean, I mentioned in the Mazda part of this video that it's missing a few things in the D-Max top spec, including an auto-dimming mirror and heated seats, and that might matter to you, especially because this is more expensive than the BT-50, although it does get a lot of those exterior bits and pieces if you like the show pony ute style. So the interior design is different, although there are some commonalities between the two vehicles. You've got the same screen, you've got the same instrument cluster, you've got an identical steering wheel, although this one says Isuzu, not Mazda, obviously. But it's still a pretty nice interior for what it is, and it does have a few advantages over the BT-50, not in terms of necessarily the styling of it, but the design, because there are some nice bits like pop-out cup holders next to the air vents, and that means that you don't have to deal with your coffee cup being too small for the central cup holders, because they're quite large. In the BT-50, it means that you might actually find yourself struggling to get your coffee out of the cup holders. Try living with a ute and going for a road trip and not having somewhere suitable to put your cup, and then come back to me in the comments section. And I actually like the design of the dashboard in this D-Max. I think it's pretty smart. It's not, as plush, but it's nice. And also it gets the added storage on top of the dash, a little storage cubby up there, which is advantageous. Now, if you've seen any of our other coverage of the D-Max, you'll know that it got a 10 out of 10 for safety tech in our reviews. And it also got a 5-star NCAP safety rating as well. And it's got everything that a ute can possibly have at this point in time. Now, if you're watching this in 2025, the game will have moved on. But in 2020, when this generation of D-Max came out, it was at the benchmark level. It set the benchmark for the segment. It's got things like a front center airbag to stop you clashing heads with someone in the event of a side impact crash. And it's also got all the safety tech you could expect. Lane keeping assistance with active lane keeping, and blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, plus front and rear parking sensors and a rear view camera. It's got pretty much everything that you can possibly get in a new car right now fitted to a ute. And the BT-50 has it all too, which is excellent. If you want to know all the nitty-gritty detail on the safety technology, what each of these utes has and what one of them misses out on, you can read all about it at the CarsGuide site. So this new generation D-Max does push the game forward for Isuzu, but next, let's jump into the Ford Ranger Wildtrak, which in some of our previous comparisons has been crowned the king of the dual cab utes. If you've seen any of our other comparison tests, you'll know that the Ford Ranger is one of our favourite utes in the segment. And even with the new competition from the BT-50 and D-Max, it still stands up as a very impressive vehicle when it comes to on-road driving. Yes, it's getting a little bit old and there's an all-new one coming soon, but you can't escape the fact that the Ranger in Wildtrak, guys, it's just very nice to drive because it's got excellent steering, which is very well weighted, and it's got a nice amount of feel through the wheel as well. And also the suspension is super comfortable. It's very soft, and that means that it just copes with lumps and bumps better than a lot of its competitors, including the other two utes in this test. Yes, it does have a little bit of a price to pay if you do need to put lots of weight in the tray, because it is a little bit soft when you do that. But if you're running around with not too much weight in the back, it's very, very good. Now, this is the bi-turbo version of the Ranger. You can get the 3.2 litre 5-cylinder still if that's what you want, but the 2 litre with the 10-speed automatic and 2 turbos is just excellent. It's super refined. It's also really punchy. You might think that a 2 litre engine in a vehicle that's designed for both work and play isn't big enough and doesn't offer enough oomph, but you'd be wrong, because this engine is powerful, it's got plenty of torque, and when you put your foot down, it just smoothly progresses you up the road. It's got a nice sound to it too, if you ask me. It's less of that diesel rattle that you get in the other utes in this test. It's got more torque and more power than both of the other utes in this test, and while it does have a narrower torque band, it's got more gears to play with, so it stays in the torque band pretty well. You don't need to worry about it shuffling away in the gears because it does it so smoothly. And overall, it just feels very refined in the Ranger Wildtrak. It's always felt good in here, and even against these new rivals, it still feels really impressive. There's lots of nice materials used in here, and it feels special as well, not just because of the dark headliner, but it does have a few elements across the dashboard, the orange stitching, the Wildtrak logo. It all just makes it feel like you're driving something a bit more special than some of its rivals. There are some things that aren't great about the way that you have to use the controls in the Ranger. There's controls for the air conditioning through the screen and through the buttons below, which is a little bit annoying, but geez, you get used to it. I mean, it's a pretty minor complaint because there's not much else to complain about inside the Ranger Wildtrak. It's comfortable, it's got very comfy seats, it's got good storage, there's cup holders. There's no pop-out cup holders like you get in the D-Max, but you do get decent sized cup holders there, so you can fit a coffee a little bit easier than you can in the D-Max and BT-50. One area where the Ranger is falling a little bit short because of its age is that it's missing things like blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert. And it doesn't have the same level of sophistication to its safety systems in terms of the steering assist. But it does operate a little bit better. It's a little bit less intrusive, and that can make a little bit more relaxed of a drive experience because yes, it does have lane keeping assist, but it's not quite as aggressive as what you find in the D-Max and the BT-50. And it's easier to disable if you just want to turn off the lane keeping system. It's just a button at the end of the stalk instead of having to go through the driver information screen and using the buttons on the steering wheel like you do in the other two utes in this test. If you want to know more about the full safety specs of each of these utes, including what speeds their AEB systems work at and whether they've got pedestrian and cyclist detection, you'll have to read the full detailed review because it's too complicated to go over right here. Now, it's Crafty's turn.
The new BT-50 and the D-Max, as you know, are essentially the same vehicle. The skin's just different, the metal is just different, the design elements. That doesn't matter when you're low range four-wheel driving. What matters is what's underneath, the guts of the vehicle. You want to know that the mechanicals are all up to the task. You want to know that the four-wheel drive system, the off-road traction control is up to the task. And the good news is the BT-50 is, it's given it a bit of heavy right boot and we're through. This is a real greasy track. It's a clay surface and it tends to become really slippery at even the slightest hint of rain, and there's been more than a hint overnight. There's been a lot of rain. It's really washed this out. It's exposed tree roots, it's exposed rocks, and it's made the holes that were pretty serious before even more severe, and it's a real challenge for a standard vehicle. The BT-50 is eating it up. We've had the D-Max here before in LSU variant, and it did it really well. That was in the dry though. So this is a really good test. Wet, slippery, pretty dangerous in parts, but the BT-50 is doing well. All the elements are there. That off-road traction control system has been recalibrated because it is the D-Max's after all. The BT-50 has a little bit less power and torque than in its previous generation, but that doesn't really matter. You don't need to go gung-ho with your right boot. Well, not most of the time anyway, every now and again. But the power and torque in this is working pretty well, as it does in the D-Max. You've really got enough there on tap. There's plenty of wheel travel. It's not a modified vehicle after all, but if you can get the tyre to the dirt, you can use that torque and you can keep going. For a stock standard vehicle, the new BT-50 is pretty impressive. Engine braking is good in the BT-50, and if you don't want to rely on that on severe downhills, you can always engage hill descent control. And again, that's shown its worth in the D-Max. We've been on this hill before in the dry and it worked really well, and in the wet it is also very effective. We've had the BT-50 run down this hill a couple of times prior to this, and it's always held its speed nice and firm, 2 or 3 kilometers an hour, and that's enough just to give you nice control and maintain that throughout, so you don't have to think about anything else. You can concentrate on, well, having fun, but also getting through unscathed. Overall, the new BT-50 has shown itself to be a pretty impressive all-round off-road package, and with that D-Max platform on which it's built, that's no surprise, because as I've mentioned, the D-Max has impressed us off-road as well. You really could do a lot worse than use a new BT-50 as your off-road tourer of choice. The D-Max did the dirt and gravel track on the way here reasonably well. It's not the most refined thing around, and it can get a little bit noisy when pushed hard, but it's perfectly fine. And now for the low range four-wheel driving, this is a hill that we've had a D-Max here before, but we had the LSU. It's all the same mechanicals. This is the X-Terrain, the top spec, all the same four-wheel drive setup, so we're not expecting any difficulties, and sure enough, it's doing it pretty well. There's no real need to put the hammer down, except here and there where the washed out ruts are quite deep and are quite severe, and your way out can be quite steep, but the D-Max seems more than up to the task. The D-Max has always had a pretty robust four-wheel drive setup, but in the past it was hampered by a less than ideal off-road traction control system, let's be honest, but that's been sorted out with this new lineup. It's proving its worth. It's doing this easily, and as an all-round package, it really is quite impressive. Because the BT-50 and the D-Max have so much in common, it really is like driving the same ute, and both utes are very effective. The Ford Ranger did a great job coming in over lightly corrugated gravel and dirt tracks, but this is now the serious stuff. We are in low range, we've got the rear diff lock locked, and we're getting wheels up. This is the fun part of four-wheel driving. The engine is up to the task. There's nothing wrong with the Ford Ranger's bi-turbo engine. There's plenty of torque, plenty of gears in the auto transmission to cycle through to make sure that you're at that peak torque range, and it's comfortably capable, and that's the thing with the Ranger, and that's what sets it apart from pretty much every other ute around, is that while many of the others, pretty much all modern utes, are capable, the Ranger tends to eat hardcore terrain up. Off-road traction control in the Ranger is quietly effective. It's always chirping away. It's always giving you that little bit of torque, that little bit of traction to keep you moving, and safe, controlled, sustained momentum is what four-wheel driving's all about. We're popping wheels all over the place, but some pretty serious obstacles to get through. You've got to put the boot in a little bit, but the Ranger is more than up to the task. In this trio, however, the Ranger has the shallowest off-road angles and the least amount of ground clearance, but with a bit of considered driving, you're generally okay, but it does tend to grind and bump and ground itself on some of the sharper, steeper rocks and through the deeper ruts. But as long as you take your time and pick your line, you're generally okay. Down this muddy hill is a real good test of a standard four-wheel drive. If you pitch it into a hole, you don't have a lot of space to move. And remember, we're relying on essentially highway tyres, stock standard tyres, which are doing pretty well in the circumstances, but obviously that's something you'd swap out and you'd go for a more aggressive all-terrain set of tyres. Hill descent control in the Ranger is another strong part of its off-road arsenal. At the moment, it's keeping us to a steady speed of about 2 or 3 kilometres, and that's important when you're on a steep, real greasy sort of clay surface, just to keep you in control. You'll hear it every now and again sort of chime in, but it really is quite non-intrusive, but still very effective. While the Ranger feels a little bit unwieldy, especially through tight treed sections like this, it's actually quite easy to manoeuvre. The steering is light and precise. It even feels a little bit too floaty at times, especially on open dirt tracks. But on this sort of stuff where you need supreme manoeuvrability, you need to be able to get in and out of tight turns. While it feels big in terms of dimensions, it doesn't feel big, if this makes sense, in terms of steerability around, especially in low range four-wheel driving.
At the start of this video, we said it was all about how they go on-road and off-road, and surprising both of us was the fact that the Ford Ranger Wildtrak was the best in both of those situations. It's still a really good ute, but these are very strong competitors that it's up against, including the Isuzu D-Max X-Terrain.
Absolutely, mate, spot on. And this definitely looks the business. And it is very comfortable and it is very capable on and off-road, as is the BT-50 GT. But that's if you want a little bit more of a prestige feel. It's quite nice.
Yeah, it's got a bit more classy feel to it. And the Ford Ranger, well, it is starting to miss out on some of the bits that the newer utes have, like all that comprehensive safety equipment. But it is also the most expensive of these three. So it really depends what your preferences are, and we'd love to know what they are. Let us know in the comments section below, whether you're on the CarsGuide site where you can find the full detailed review, or if you're on the YouTube channel, you'll find the full detailed review story link in the description below. And if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget, hit like, hit share, you know, do whatever Crafty says you should do, and also make sure you hit the bell icon and stay up to date with all of our latest content.